tool for us to continue to compete among us against the government with the drug is only started to check. And I'm the
The Sharpeville Massacre, 1960, 69 people were killed. It is at that point that Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress decided that the campaign of nonviolence was no longer working. And that is when they formed an organization called Umkhonto weSizwe, which means the spear of the nation. And that is when they started fighting the South African government. So with the Sharpeville Massacre, there were two people. There was also Robert Sobukwe of the Pan-African Congress, but for us, we will talk about Mr. Mandela, what he meant. He came to Lagos. When he came to Lagos in 1961, the administration of Tapewa Balewa gave him $10,000, and they gave them arms to be able to fight the South African government. At the end, I will talk about the outsized role that Nigeria played in the liberation of South Africa. Between 1960 and 1992, Nigeria provided $61 billion to South Africa in aid to fight the apartheid regime. Okay? So, Mr. Mandela was arrested and he was put in prison. He was given a life sentence, and this is where he served his time in a place called Robben Island. Now, what I want to note, that was his cell when he arrived. And Mr. Mandela is very tall. I am about 6'2". Mandela is like this. I look up to, so imagine being put in that cell. I want to draw your attention to this thing. This is the meals. This is the menu of the food that was served in the prisons in South Africa. So you want to know why apartheid is so bad? The blacks and the whites had separate menus. The blacks and the Indians, sorry. So look, blacks were given maybe 1 sugar for tea. The Indians were given 2. So that means that if you were to give a black man an extra cube of sugar, you were breaking the law, because the law says that the black man should have less meat, less chicken, less eggs, less salt. It's coded into law. Imagine somebody writing something like this: so you can cook a pot of soup, but the soup has too much meat, you cannot give it to the black person because the law says you can't do that. And that is the system of oppression that the 1976 Olympic team sacrificed the Olympic ambition for. It is defeating this racist system. This was the law. So I wish I had more time, so I'm just going to cycle through these very quickly. Prior to getting to 1976 already, South Africa came up again at the 1966 World Cup. The 1966 World Cup was held in England, and there were 16 teams invited to the tournament. 10 teams from Europe, 3 teams from South America, 2 teams from the Americas, leaving 1 slot for Oceania, Africa, and Asia. That is over half the planet, over 3 billion people, and they're giving 1 slot for FIFA. So CAF, because at that time the Organization of African Unity did not exist, so CAF said, no, this is not good. You can't do this. Moreover, South Africa was not even a part of CAF because they did not want to play a country in Africa with black players. So FIFA now put them in the Asian qualifying group. So which meant that eventually, if there's a playoff, you still have to play against a black team. So Dr. Nkrumah of Ghana, led by CAF, decided, no. Africans are not going to the 1966 World Cup. So that is the first time we started to see soft power from Africa. Ironically, the best player at the 1966 World Cup was a Portuguese player named Eusebio, who is from Mozambique. Okay? Because in those days, unless you were an independent African country, you're not a part of FIFA. FIFA only admitted independent countries. So for several years, many Africans were playing for their European colonizers because they could not play for their home countries. Now, we now look at the Nigeria itself. We went through 3 heads of state in 6 months. Nigeria in the 1970s went through 3 heads of state in 6 months. This happened at the 1968 Olympic Games. This gesture, again, South Africa was involved when African American athletes decided that they were going to protest. And what were they protesting exactly? The end of apartheid in South Africa, the immediate release of Nelson Mandela, and the restoration of Muhammad Ali as the legitimate heavyweight champion of the world. Again, so we've seen this thing prior to that, which takes us now to Soweto, June 16, 1976, the Soweto uprising. School children were protesting. The South African government has said, okay, look, in addition to English, your instruction states now stood up and said, no, enough is enough. June 16, and today in South Africa, that is a holiday, June 16th, right? The Soweto uprising, it is the first time that youths or anybody stood up to the apartheid regime in South Africa. So then, why then, New Zealand, do you think it's a good idea to send athletes to go on tour in South Africa? You just saw what happened. Then on the 30th of June, you now send your rugby team to go and play in South Africa. So the African nation said, no, we have an Olympics coming up. And if you send this rugby team to South Africa to play, and you allow them to go to the Olympics, we're not coming. That's it. We're boycotting. We're not coming to the Olympics. New Zealand and South Africa have been playing rugby against each other since 1921. So at that time, it was a 55-year-old rivalry. The government of New Zealand said that we're no more sending teams to play. In 1972, the government said we're no more sending teams to go and play in South Africa. The opposition party in New Zealand now said, look, right before the 1975 election, they now said, if you elect us to come into power, we will send the team back to South Africa. And they won the election in a landslide. So on that promise, they now sent the team to South Africa, and the African country said, no, we can't. And that is the basis of the rugby tour of 1976. 2 weeks after the Soweto uprising, the Supreme Council of Sport for Africa, led by Chief Abraham Ordia as the president, he's a Nigerian, he stood up and he announced the boycott. In fact, as I understand it, he met with the 1976 team in Montreal. He made the announcement that they are coming home. Now, in South Africa, rugby means everything to the whites in South Africa. I show you this picture because it was easier for a black man to be the president of South Africa than it was to be the captain of the rugby team. Nelson Mandela became president in 1994. It took 25 years to have a black man as the captain of their rugby team. So that just goes to give you the extent of which they value rugby in the country. Okay? So as a result of that, this man, the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Sport for Africa, he now addressed why they're pulling their African athletes. Can I get volume, please?
We think that this is our right. Anybody can take part or not take part in the game. We have right to say we not take part in the game. No one will oblige us to take part. If they take part in the game, they only Brazil will be so far to Brazil after the massacre of Soweto, we will be the black man. That is the result. Us, we must grow. Because we want easy for the Africa. We want they respect us, and we want that everybody in the world know that man is man. He is for man of man. And after the massacre of Soweto, it's not a problem of God. It's a humanitarian problem. Right.
So that's what happened. 27 countries boycotted the Olympics. Of those 27, 17 never entered. 10 entered and with drew the athletes. In fact, Cameroon was participating in cycling when they have to pull the cyclists off the bike and say, yeah, we are going home. That's it. That's what happened. 174 athletes in athletics alone were impacted. The 1976 boycott was the biggest anti-racism campaign in history. Of course, as a city, they are the heroes that were forgotten. We have one here. This is a picture of a young Philbert Baye. Mr. Baye, can you stand, please? This is him. That is him. That is him at the Commonwealth Games, where he set the world record at that event in the Commonwealth Games. And what makes it special is that he set the world record by defeating Johnny Walker on home soil. That is his track. The entire 1976 Olympic team sacrificed the dream. They did the 4 years of university. They were not given the degree. The football teams of Nigeria and Zambia, Obisia Mwakwa, we had athletes from Uganda, world record holders, that were ready to make some noise, but on the sacrifice of a bigger cause, they came home. Many of those young people never competed in another Olympics again, and they can only tell you that stories. Mr. Chairman made reference to the meeting we were in yesterday. There were a lot of tears. The emotion is still there. After 47 years, they came back to the country, and that was that. As the chairman of the occasion, I've said that perhaps in hindsight, they might have done things differently when the athletes returned, but as it were, those are lessons that we have learned. Also, I will note that in Canada, Canada was the first and only country to host an Olympic Games, and nobody in the country from Canada won a gold medal. At the end of those games, Canada lost $2 billion. In fact, not only that, the entire Olympic movement was on the brink of collapse. The United Nations, UNESCO, threatened to take over the Olympic movement as a result of the debacle that was Montreal. The African boycott had a significant impact and almost crashed the Olympic movement as an organization. One last video from the Secretary General, where he is saying that this is not a Canadian thing. Volume.
The mayor of Montreal to travel to say that we are good friends of Canada, and we don't want that they think that this boycott is against them. We want to thank them for the good welcome they give to all the Africans here. This boycott is against New Zealand. It's a problem of humanity of man.
Should go to Canada first and pick the athletes. Nigeria was the only country within that first 24 hours that had an aircraft to evacuate its athletes. And with that, the Olympic dream was over. Kenya was next. Now, I want to very quickly show you that in South Africa, things were changing, but before they changed, home in Soweto. So if I can just show you a quick video of what happened when she tried to go home, how she was harassed and arrested when she tried to go to her house. Chimmy. At that time, the husband was in jail for, that is Nelson Mandela in 1977. Nobody had seen him in 13 years. That is what he looked like at that time. So I'm told that my time is almost up, so let me just go to the end. In 1977, Nigeria organized FESTAC. By the way, the full presentation will be available in the NIIA library, including the videos if you want to look at it after. All right, so I will skip by FESTAC 77, what it was in Lagos. And then I will get to the 1980 Eagles, unifying a nation. 1980, they beat an Algerian team 3-0. That Algerian team would, in the 1982 World Cup, defeat West Germany. That Algerian team would be the nucleus of the 1986 World Cup. That Algerian team was the best team outside of Egypt in Africa. And the Super Eagles knocked them off. 2 goals by Mr. Shegun Odegbami to open the scoring. It unified the nation. And there it is, the chairman hoisting the trophy in Lagos, as it was. That was 1980. So for the next 10 years, in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. In the interest of time, I won't have time to explain the relationship between the Berlin Wall coming down, the Cold War ending, and apartheid, which was a proxy. Let me just say this, any illusions of legitimacy that apartheid had was completely over. And on February 2nd, 1990, the South African president announced the unbanning of all political parties in South Africa and the unconditional release of Nelson Mandela. Prior to 1990, there have been attempts to release Nelson Mandela, but those attempts always had conditions. You must go into exile, you must do this, and he rejected all until this unconditional release. So what I want to show you now is a trajectory of the release of Nelson Mandela, the swearing in of Nelson Mandela 4 years earlier, the ending of apartheid, and then the award of the 2010 World Cup. I need to be very clear about this. Without the efforts of Nigeria, there is no World Cup in South Africa in 2010. It just doesn't happen.
In pursuance of my opening address in Parliament, I Yesterday evening, I met with Mr. Mandela in Cape Town, together with Mr. Smith and Chief. During the meeting, Mr. Mandela was informed of the government's decision regarding his release. We would all like Mr. Mandela's release to take place in a dignified and orderly manner.
The 2010 FIFA World Cup will be organized in
These are the contributions of Nigerians to the ending of apartheid. As I said, between 1960 and 1990, Nigeria provided $61 billion. In fact, in the 1970s, Nigeria refused to sell its oil to South Africa, and that cost Nigeria $42 billion in revenue, but on principle, we never sold oil to South Africa during apartheid. Nigeria was a frontline state. Federal civil servants were required to pay 2% of their taxes, called the Mandela tax, 2% of their salary going to the cause of apartheid in South Africa. General Murtala Mohammed personally sponsored 6,000 South African students to university, personally. General Olusegun Obasanjo during his regime raised over $35 million for a South African cause. So today, as a Nigerian, when you consider the role that your country played along with the other frontline states, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Zambia, Mozambique, Botswana, Nigeria, though it's not in Southern Africa, was absolutely a frontline state in the fall of apartheid and the liberation of the South African people. Yeah, so you know, I'm always reading in the news that they're asking Nigerians to leave South Africa, this, that. Really? Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in the time we have left is it possible to bring the World Cup to West Africa? The World Cup now has 48 teams. Beginning in 2026, the World Cup is now too big for one country to host. At the 2026 World Cup, it will be hosted by the US, Canada, and Mexico, 3 countries across 16 different host sites. Might we be able to create a situation in 2034 where the World Cup comes to West Africa? But why would you want a World Cup in West Africa? The reason is because of the regional connectivity, skills acquisition. Imagine being able to drive from Yaoundé all the way to Dakar and take a ferry to Cape Verde. These are all ECOWAS countries. You do not need a passport to get in, right? So the infrastructure benefits of being able to connect the region because of the World Cup. And also, by the way, I might add that countries that host the World Cup have a problem after the tournament because they build these big stadiums, and then after the tournament, there's nobody to use the stadium, and the stadiums cost money to maintain. But if you do a regional World Cup, every country has at least one functional stadium that can be used even after the World Cup. So how would that work? with the colorful pageant that we have in West Africa, I will leave you with this. Volume.
Promising in the second half. Revolution! When it breaks free, and the opportunity is seized upon.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much.
Could be louder than that. Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and
Rest of the international affairs, we have this we want to unveil this thing together, sir.
Please, back, please. You can't stay there.
Bro, you know this thing. Like, see, I told you, I took fights for all of them. I told you,
there's nothing
Thank you,
So, on behalf of Nigerian School of International Affairs, I want to say thank you very much for bringing this NI sport diplomacy to this place and for honoring the heroes of Nigeria. Thank you very much, sir.
The curtain is falling on this episode of the conversation. Appreciated all love for our chair, His Excellency Professor Bola Yakemi, the chairman.
Boycotted the 1976 Summer Olympic Games held in Montreal, Canada, on the eve of the Games, by calling its entire team back home in protest against the apartheid regime in South Africa, and so force a generation of Nigerian sports stars to become Olympians and read the tempo of their career development and attainments were fractured, if not shattered. These sports heroes made a tough choice to place the trophy above professional with no recognition and forgotten. But 47 years after, a rare Nigerian businessman
Please, media. Can all the media people enter here? Can all the media people, excuse me.
We are going to take the flag and unveil it. You read it.
This tablet address the opening of the NIA's Sports Diplomacy Hall of Fame by Mr. Allen Chairman FBC on Friday, 28 July 2023.
We'll proceed with the names of the wall. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. In 1976, at the Olympic Games in Montreal, Canada, 27 African countries led by Nigeria boycotted the games in protest against apartheid in South Africa. Although a diplomatic success, it was also an ultimate sacrifice by the athletes that gave up their dreams and careers for the cause of freedom for South Africa. Most of them never went to another Olympics. These are the names of the Nigerian heroes. The NIA AP Sports Diplomacy Wall of Fame, the athletics team for 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal, Canada. The members were Kolawole Abdullahi, Rooks Bazunu, Moses Adebayo Adebanji, Edward Ofili, Mike Olomu, Chuks Abigide, John Okoro, Charlton Ehusialen, Moses Agorowo, Godwin Obasogie, Greywood Oruwari, Modupe Oshikoya, Gloria Anyonlaja, Bruce T. Ijirigo, Dele Udo, Felix Imadili, Benjamin Omadiale, Rotimi Peters, Dennis Otonum, Taiwo Ogunjobi, and the football team of the 1976 Olympics team are, or we are, Emmanuel Okala, Joseph Eriko, Joseph Andrew Atiebu, Sani Mohammed, Mudashiru Lawal, Christian Chukwu, Shego Degbami, Kelechi Emetiole, Haruna Ilerika, Godwin Odie, Adekunle Awesu, Thompson Usien, Aloysius Atiebu, Babotu Mohammed, Jide Tina, Patrick Ekeji, Samuel Ojebode, and the boxing team for 1976 Olympic team, Obisi Anwakpa, Davis Ande, El Obagoriola, and John Ebito. In 1980, 22 Nigerian football players represented the country at the 12th African Cup of Nations in Lagos, Nigeria. They became African champions for the first time in Nigeria's history.